So there are some interesting, peculiar, or absurd questions and critiques in moral psychology that I can think of. Um, One of the things that people typically ask is the kinds of stimuli and materials that you have in moral psychology are far removed from the real life. So you can think about the trolley dilemma, for example, right? Um, Something like that, to my knowledge, has not happened through history, and it's not something that you encounter every day. So one of the critiques is that moral psychology is far removed from the real life and everyday life, and um, it would be good to push the field towards more realistic scenarios and more realistic contexts. And I think it's a fair criticism. I agree to some extent. But the idea in moral psychology is to create clean experimental conditions to study things in isolation. So yeah, obviously things like the trolley dilemma has not happened or probably will not happen in everyday life. But we can learn a lot from those dilemmas and from those scenarios that can be applied in different applied settings. So that exact scenario is probably not very common, but similar scenarios in which we have to weigh different courses of action, they are quite common in everyday life, and um, by using those dilemmas, we can get insights about how the mind works in those moral contexts. So that's one of the things that I've heard before. In terms of, I think the other part of the question was amusing. So there are some amusing stimuli and some amusing experiments in moral psychology. So I teach moral psychology in a part of my class on cultural diversity, and I typically show my students the moral dumbfounding effect. So I start by describing um, one of the scenarios um, that have been identified as peculiar or disgusting. That's the whole point. For example, siblings having sexual relations or someone eating a corpse. So those are perceived as disgusting, and but that's the whole point. Like we want people to feel that way and see how that emotional reaction is shaping their moral judgment. Some of them are amusing, students love them because they are designed in an interesting, peculiar way. So that's one of the other things I can think about. In the moral dumbfounding literature, there are quite a few amusing, interesting, disgusting scenarios that people can check out. I can see two important directions in the future of moral psychology. One is understanding how the mind adjudicate between different alternative moral intuitions. So I think a lot of moral psychologists have identified important values, important moral intuitions. A lot of moral pluralists have created lists of different moral foundations or moral values and so on. The thing is, a lot of people care about multiple of these in everyday life, and in many contexts, these come into conflict, right? So, for example, imagine the scenario: your friend whom you really care about shows you a piece of paper or I don't know, like a piece of artwork, and they ask for your honest opinion about that. So, you evaluate the work, you take a look, and you think it's horrible. Now, what do you do? One course of action would be I'm going to preserve my friend's feelings. I'm not going to hurt my friend's feelings, and I'm going to just tell them that it's good. And the other course of action might be something like honesty takes precedence, and I have to be an honest person in all contexts, regardless of the consequences. So I'm going to be honest and tell my friend that this work is bad. So people care about loyalty to their friend. People care about honesty. How do you adjudicate those conflicting values? in contexts like that. So I think we need more work in that area, um, adjudicating between values in moral dilemmas. So that's one of the things I can think of. And the second direction that moral psychology is fortunately moving towards, although that can be improved, is the inclusion of non-Western perspectives and non-Western ideas. Um, the field of moral psychology has been traditionally very Western centric, and that has posed a problem because much of our understanding of morality is basically our understanding of Western morality, not human morality in the broadest sense possible. But I think more and more people are realizing this, and people are moving towards inclusion of non-Western voices um, and non-Western perspectives on morality. Yeah, that is a great question. I think there's no doubt that the meaning of moral dilemmas varies across cultures. There is a good amount of work right now in the field showing that not only endorsement of different values changes from one population to another, but also the meaning of moral dilemmas changes from one culture to another. Um, it used to be the case that people assumed um, that moral dilemmas are about quote unquote universal features of the mind. Um, and of course, people used to, mostly rely on Western, well, mostly the US samples. Again, mostly undergraduate students in big universities in the US. But as we are conducting more cross-cultural research in moral psychology, we are seeing more and more differences across populations. And again, this is not just in terms of like, making decisions in a utilitarian way or in a deontic way or in that, just the meaning of dilemmas varies across populations. One other thing that I will say is that in cross-cultural work in moral psychology, the people who actually design stimuli are still mostly Western. So there are very good papers that I like, and they're cross-cultural, and they ask about the trolley dilemma or some other stimuli, and they, and I've been involved in those projects as well sometimes. We ask people from many countries, dozens of countries, for example, questions that have been designed, that have been derived from the weird minds of the study leaders. So what I would love to see is more work coming out of the non-Western world. So basically, non-Western researchers designing a cross-cultural work, so that the stimuli and the vignettes and the questionnaires and decision problems that we see are designed by non-weird minds. Yeah. Let's see. Um, so obviously these are my personal preferences and things that I would love to see in the field. One of them is more attention to emotions. Moral emotions, I think, remain understudied in moral psychology. It would be good to have more research on um, construction and interpretation of moral emotions, especially across different populations. Um, I think there is also an unbalance in the kinds of moral emotions that we study. For example, I think disgust is studied pretty commonly, um, but there are other emotional um, constructs that we have not studied as much. So traditionally, disgust has been sort of most famous moral emotion. It has been studied by many different teams in different populations, so that's great. We know a lot about it. There's recent work on outrage. That's also great. Um, it's also related to disgust. But there is a whole array of moral emotions that remain understudied. So I would love to see more work, more cross-cultural work on emotions like pride or even anger, I think is understudied. There is good work showing that there could be different kinds of anger, um, and so on. So emotions are remain understudied, and it would be great um, if more moral psychologists studied that. The other recommendation is to diversify the kinds of questions we ask in moral psychology. Um, I think in the last 2 decades or so, um, we have there has been a lot of work in moral psychology, but the kinds of questions we ask are not particularly varied. Um, so it would be great to ask questions about other forms of moral cognition, other moral values that remain understudied, um, and also to just study moral psychology in understudied cultural contexts. Um, well, here's one example. Um, Moral and cultural psychologists in the West have studied the construct of honor and honor culture, right? Um, they have done so in a very particular way. Typically, as you know, honor culture is associated with revenge and violence and transgressions, um, which is fine. We know a lot about one particular flavor of honor culture. Um, but but the concept of honor can vary quite a bit in non-Western societies. And there could be different flavors of honor in non-Western societies. Um, in Turkish, for example, the concept of namus and sheref can be understood in different ways from the concept of honor culture in the US or in Europe, for example, right? So it would be great if future research could actually develop theories about these understudied constructs, these understudied psychological experiences. And I think the field, again, is moving towards that, which is great, but we can do more.